Hello everybody, I'm Martin Katz from Katz & Co. We're a professional service firm based here in the beautiful Isle of Man, and today I'm going to tell you a little bit about corporate service providers and how to choose one. So if you found this video, you probably already know what a corporate service provider is. It's a company which manages companies and sometimes trusts here based in the Isle of Man. And Isle of Man companies are used for a variety of things: investment companies, trading companies, so on and so forth. And the reason why it's a popular place to set a company up is because companies in the Isle of Man pay tax in the main at 0%, with one or two exceptions, which are banks and local rental income and large retailers locally. So the vast majority of Isle of Man companies just pay tax at 0%, which, as you can imagine, makes it a popular place to set a company up. But you always have to be mindful of the anti-tax avoidance rules that exist where you live. So if you've taken tax advice and you decide to use an Isle of Man company, you're most likely going to need a corporate service provider. Corporate service providers are the people who provide services to the company. So they'll form the company, they'll provide a registered office address for it, very often they'll provide professional directors for it, help you open the bank account, and generally look after the administration of the company, do other things like ensure accounts are prepared, file the returns with our registrar of companies, and so on and so forth. So corporate service providers are a very important party if you've got an Isle of Man company, and you need to make sure you have an extremely good relationship with them. So it's quite important that you choose a good corporate service provider, because if you don't, it will turn out to be a nightmare for you, because they may be unresponsive, they may have a lack of expertise, and they may charge you too much. So what should you do when you're looking for a corporate service provider? Which are the factors that you should take into account? Well, the first thing I would do first is to check that they are genuinely in the Isle of Man. It's quite often many corporate service adverts for Manx companies. If you look on Google, you will notice that they may not have an Isle of Man phone number. So they need to have a 01624, that's a +441624, which is the code for the Isle of Man phone number. If they don't have a phone number starting with 01624, then I would move on and find somebody who does. That's the first thing. The second thing that I would do is I would check their expertise. So maybe ask them a few questions, ask them about the difference between, for example, a 1931 Act company, 2006 Act company. Ask them whether you can have non-resident directors, ask them about opening bank accounts, and listen carefully to their responses and make sure that those responses are sensible. If they are, then that's a good thing. Find out, if you're going to have professional directors, you need to find out who those people are going to be. There'll be people from within the organisation, and ideally find out about as much about them as you can. So maybe ask for their CVs, and ensure that you are going to be dealing with them directly and not just with an administrator, because these are the people who are effectively acting on behalf of the company that you own, and you need to be sure that you can have direct correspondence with them. Certainly some of the larger corporate service providers tend to just have administrators look after the companies, because the people who are acting as the directors maybe are too important to speak to you, which is not a good thing. The other thing that I would check is ask for their terms and conditions, and read them carefully, make sure you understand them. I would check to see if there are any termination fees. Quite often there are, and if there are, you should be able to ask them to remove these, because at this stage you have a bit more leverage, because hopefully they want you as a client. Make sure that they will provide you with time records to the lowest level of detail, because corporate service providers do have a little bit of a habit of playing fast and loose with the time record, so charging you more than you would expect. So that's definitely worth asking that they will do that. Check the charge out rates. You might get a bit of a surprise because they are quite high very often. Administrators could be charged at anything up to £125 an hour, and the key senior staff maybe even more than that. So it's very important that you do actually just be aware of kind of what you're letting yourself in for on that. If it's possible, I would always try and negotiate a fixed fee. Certainly, it's not so easy if your company is a trading company, for example, and there's going to be unforeseen calls on the directors and the administrators' time. But if it's simply a matter of, say, a fairly passive entity, then it's perfectly reasonable for you to ask for a fixed fee and see how you get on with that. In terms of fees, these days probably you should be looking round about probably £1,000 to set the company up typically. Annual fees do vary quite a bit, depends on the services that you're asking for. But if, for example, you are asked, if it's unmanaged, which by our parlance means basically if you're acting as your own directors, then probably fees around sort of £2,500 a year plus VAT would be normal. Sometimes there's a compliance fee as well, which might be £500. If it's managed, then you're probably closer to the sort of £4,000 or £5,000 a year would be fairly typical for a managed company. So that is kind of roughly where it's at. In terms of sort of government fees, actually our incorporation fees are quite low. It's £100 the incorporation fee, but obviously those other the amount of £1,000 that I quoted includes things like preparing the documents, doing the due diligence, which is, it's corporate service providers here are regulated by the Financial Services Authority, so they have to follow pretty stringent rules over the due diligence. They'll have to identify all of the owners and also anyone who's acting as a director if it isn't them, as well as understanding the purpose of the company and so on. And so that fee I think is fairly justifiable actually. Other than that, personally, I tend to favour the smaller owner-managed companies simply because, as a client, you tend to be more important than going with the larger companies. Many of the larger companies actually are now owned by private equity, which, as you can imagine, effectively the people in the company are working for the shareholder rather than for the clients. That tends to be the case. Owner-managed companies don't suffer from that to the same extent, I would say. So I would definitely favour that. Failing that, if you'd like a referral to a good corporate service provider, obviously we know most of the corporate service providers here on the island, and we'd be very happy to make an introduction for you to a CSP. We don't provide those services ourselves, but I have done that personally for many years. So I do know most of the people who are on the island providing that service. So that's a quick overview of the corporate service provider sector here on the island. I hope that's useful. And as I say, if we can help you further, feel free to drop me a line, get in touch. Thank you very much. Bye bye.